Tonight, American Masters goes behind the scenes with the man who created the most successful news program on television and forever changed the face of broadcast journalism. Don Hewitt, executive producer of 60 Minutes.
I gotta get a show in the air.
Tonight, for the first time in 30 years, we go where no outside reporters have been, inside the offices, corridors, and screening rooms of 60 Minutes to show you what makes it tick.
Let's go look at this.
We followed 3 stories. This is the finished product.
Today, the Kennedys are still active in the family business.
This is how it got there.
1338 minus 41.
You don't have the time to do it.
I don't know what he's doing.
Well, I'm telling you, Don's gonna look at this. He's gonna just sit there. He's gonna just sit there and go, okay, I get it. I get it.
This is the most feared man in television.
Well, they are behind bars because they were tricked into serving as unwitting drug mules.
This is the most feared man at 60 Minutes.
We Americans in prison in Ecuador, who, if you believe their story, shouldn't be. What? You can't say they shouldn't be.
And this is the story that nearly destroyed 60 Minutes.
I thought everybody had lost their minds.
People weren't talking to each other. People were accusing each other of things. What does Don say?
Not much.
These stories and more, tonight on American Masters. Don Hewitt, 90 Minutes on 60 Minutes.
American Masters.
Brought to you by Conseco. How do you plan on funding your retirement? Conseco can help. Conseco. Step up.
Major funding for this program was provided by the National Endowment for the Arts, Rosalind P. Walter, viewers like you, and by the following.
Don?
Yes.
What do you think is the most important thing a young journalist like me could learn from an old school journalist?
That what we do on 60 Minutes is what everybody should be doing. And it's 4 words that every child in the world knows. Tell me a story. And learn how to tell them a story, and you'll be a success. You won't believe this. I've been in television 50 years. I never went through anything like this before in my life. I didn't know, and nobody ever filmed me. I never did this in 50 years.
That's because you're a behind-the-scenes man.
Yeah, I've done this to other people, and now I know. Paparazzi. I tend to overly dramatize my life because I'm a child of the movies. I never knew whether I wanted to be Julian Marsh, the Broadway producer in 42nd Street, or Hildy Johnson, the reporter in Front Page. And I walked into a television studio for the first time, and I looked at the lights and the cameras and the makeup men, and I said, oh my God, I can be both of them. And that's what happened. And I'm living a fantasy life, and for reasons I don't understand, it's been highly successful.
Don grew up in New Rochelle, New York, the son of an advertising salesman for the Hearst organization. While other kids were playing cowboys and Indians, Don was playing reporter. Now at 75, as the executive producer of 60 Minutes, he still goes after the business of journalism with the same energy and enthusiasm he showed as a kid. And although he moves in a world of impersonal corporate leadership, dictated by consensus, focus groups, and polls, and oversees a staff of more than 100, at heart, 60 Minutes is still the ma-and-pa shop it was when he started it in 1968 with a handful of people. And it still runs on the gut instinct of Don Hewitt. On most days, it's his routine to do the New York Times crossword puzzle before heading to the office. At 7 a.m., he is usually the first to arrive. From then on, there is nothing routine about Don Hewitt.
Good morning. I got such a solid group around me. Phil Scheffler is maybe the best editor in America, print or broadcast. Esther Cardigainer is so good at being able to see the uncut transcripts and say, listen, I read everything that guy said, and I'm not sure we're being as fair to him as we should be. Josh Howard, as a senior producer, manages producers and stories better than any managing editor I know. And Mary Lieberthal runs the studio like nobody else does that. They're my family. I love these people.
Good morning, 60 Minutes.
Okay, I can transfer you to the program information. They can tell you the story on that. That was a tame one because most of them have been big complaints today.
The table of organization says 5 reporters and 22 producers. I said, no, I have 27 reporters. I let 5 of them broadcast because they broadcast better than the others.
When I asked the question about the family, I have to tell you, that is a pretty awesome expression you have right now. It's fine. I mean, I think that works fine. I would. The only thing I would do is I'd put a little bit more pause in there.
How long is it?
2 minutes too long. 14:20.
That's all?
That's all.
And if there is no French at all, voila, dossier.
I saw the piece thus far, and it is an interesting piece.
You saw the piece?
Well, I was down in the editing room. I didn't see it all, but I've been
And
watching.
Hewitt permitted you to see it? This is unlike Mr. Hewitt.
Yes, he has.
Have you seen other pieces, too?
Yes.
Oh, we're breaking. I find it a little strange that he is letting you see the way things play out, how we work and all of that, because only for the reason that we are constantly told and have agreed not to do that.
Yeah. Got it.
There's no way that American Masters could tell the story of what Don Hewitt does without seeing him do it. We asked, and he agreed.
And he's the boss.
When we started 60 Minutes and hired all these producers, it's just like a good magazine editor. I have all these stories, and each week or month, I will decide which 3 or 4 I'll put in the magazine. That's a pretty good way to run this. And I don't think the magazine editor is sitting there looking over the shoulder of every writer who writes for Vanity Fair or The New Yorker, or even Time or Newsweek or U.S. News. And they take the best of the stories and they assemble them. And I said, that's better than having an assignment desk. You guys go find your stories. You know what interests me. You know what interests our audience. We wouldn't have hired you if we didn't think you could do them well. If you're not very good, somebody's going to fire you anyway. So go be good and go do stories.
What happened to West Side Story?
We're going to see it pretty soon.
Harry Anderson.
He's working on it.
It's October, and the new season is just getting underway. Monday morning, Don and his senior staff discuss the lineup of this week's program.
Williams Syndrome and the Kennedys. Would we lead with the Kennedys?
Yeah, I don't know again whether we leave with the Kennedys. I don't know. I'd keep for the second half hour. We got a bigger.
I'd lead with the Kennedys.
The numbers jump at 7:30, and you don't know whether there's a tied-up game.
Yeah, but it makes a better show to start with the Kennedys.
I don't know.
It's a good story.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
We should put Safer on, and we should put Croft on.
There are 5 of us, plus Rooney, of course, who gets on every week. There are 5 of us, which means that somebody's going to back off. Some 2 people are going to have to back off each time. And you want to have it fairly even at the end of the year, which I'm sure is understandable.
We're like 5 little competing companies, all chasing the same stories, very protective of one another. And then one team doesn't tell the other team what they're doing, what they're looking into.
The 5 correspondents compete against one another for good stories. The producers compete against one another for good stories. The producers on the same correspondence team compete against each other for stories. And that makes everybody better. I mean, I hate to say it, it's so cliche, but only the strong survive.
Scott, you and Miss Amanpour are planning to go to Algiers when? Yes. Look, I should be able to let you know. We've had long talks now with the Algerians here. I'm not optimistic that they will agree to what we're after. So after I've heard back from them here, I'll give you a call. Meantime, lay off.
So this is what happens when 2 people want to do the same story?
Christiane Amanpour, I don't blame her, wants to do a story about Algeria, where all of these massacres have been taking place.
At 60 Minutes, I have to fight much harder for the stories. But it's good. Competition is good. And may the best man win, or woman.
Let me see who's on here. Hello. Yes? Hey. Hi, honey. Where are you? Wonderful. Okay. Nope. Bye. That's Christiane Amanpour. Best piece of talent in television.
Looks like a blue sheet.
It is. Christiane Amanpour.
We have a system of blue sheets. In order to stake your claim to a story, you have to submit a blue sheet to Scheffler, Hewitt, and Josh Howard. And the minute that gets submitted, that means that that's that correspondent and that producer's story. And so a lot of people will submit the blue sheets, but by the time they send them in, even though they're the first one there, Don will say, yeah, but Mike called me last night at 11:30 and already gave it to me verbally, so it's really Mike's story.
Don fostered the competition, yeah. He liked the creative tension. I think that they used to say Ben Bradley did that at the Washington Post, and he was right. Absolutely. Makes everybody work a little bit harder. I'm going to beat that son of a gun.
I don't know that he actively does it, but if he proposes something and you're at all hesitant, you say, oh, well, maybe Mike would like this. And you say, well, wait a minute.
The competition is such that you blue sheet first. You blue sheet first.
But you know what? You blue sheet first, and then you talk to other producers, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's how you do it.
Yeah, that's how I do it.
You know, the mandate really is that this place not lose the story. That's the key. You don't want ABC or NBC to get that story before us.
How'd we do last night? I'm afraid to find out. Hi, hon, it's Don Hewitt. You got the fast track nationals from last night? We dropped under 11-5 on being... You know, most people would pray for 11-5. Oh, yeah. A 10-8. That's pretty bad. What was the share, 20? Dateline got a what? About a 15 share? Well, we won the time period, I guess. Yeah, but that's small consolation. Yeah, a lot of cable stuff, and baseball, and football, and until we get past daylight saving time, I don't know where we're gonna go. Okay, thanks, Ray. Bye. Oh, well. Lose your ratings, keep your soul.
Before 60 Minutes, it never occurred to anyone that news programs could get high ratings or prove profitable. Don sharpened the punch, quickened the pace, and by the late 70s, 60 Minutes was in the top 10, a CBS leader in ratings and revenues.
Two things distinguish us. We started a trend, and we ruined television because we made it profitable to do this kind of thing. So everybody came in, you know, hey, come on in, the water's fine. They don't do it very well. But everybody they work for has looked at the balance sheet and said, hey, this is a gold mine.
Hello, 60 Minutes. Okay, you're calling with a story idea?
Right now, you finished a show. You've got to find another show. What in the world do you do?
You get on your hands and knees and pray.
You have to do 5 stories a year. And that sounds like nothing. But these are long, prime-time, fully researched, fully thought-out stories. And the truth is, to hit the 60 minutes standard, you have to begin 10, 15 stories. You have to explore many more stories than you ever do.
We just wanted to give you the Al Gore update. You have a breakfast scheduled for Monday. Hi, Don.
I told Chris Shad that Tom Anderson told me that they're getting off the story, and, and I'm going to explain her.
She's
All
in
right.
Sarajevo?
She's in Sarajevo.
It's too late to call her.
Yes, we got her cell number.
Okay.
Does he know about the Gore breakfast?
He doesn't know, but I don't think Christian will be available for that.
Before you're even into the research and preparing the correspondent with all of the kind of background, I mean, because they get tremendously up to speed and you have to become an expert first. So before you're even into the substance of the story, it's just finding one. And I think it's the hardest part of what we do.
Yeah, that's what we're going to use.
60 Minutes.
With so many competing news magazine programs on the air, it's getting harder and harder to gather the 120 compelling stories that comprise a season.
Okay, fax me 10 documents, okay, and then call me. I'm very interested.
We do a feature, we do a hard story, we do an investigative thing. There's a mix, as long as it's interesting. And Hewitt keeps saying, "Tell me something I didn't know."
Here on the Protestant side of the line, every family will tell you that they were threatened with
Tonight
attack
we
by
look
the Roman
not at the struggle itself, but at
What
two
the
men
general
who-
knew and didn't tell was a matter of life and death.
In the last 3 weeks alone, another several hundred Algerians have been hacked to death. And it's not clear just who's doing it or why.
They say that you're only as good as your next story. It used to be said that you're only as good as your last story, but at 60 Minutes, I think you're only as good as your next story because you don't have that time to gloat over the last story. It's about what's next.
Do you have your next story after this one?
No, this is my next story.
Michael Radutsky has been at 60 Minutes 1 year.
So we'll see how it goes.
So you're on the hot seat.
Uh-huh.
But he told us that he has wanted this job since he first saw the program when he was 12 years old. His story, reported by Ed Bradley, concerns the controversies that engulf the current generation of Kennedys. This story and ours were taped before the death of Michael Kennedy and the announced resignation of his brother Joe.
We met with Joe Kennedy. Ed talked to Joe Kennedy.
You know, Joe and I had a relationship, and I mean, we talked on the phone, and he trusted me. I mean, essentially, to say, you know, I'll be fair with you, you know. I don't have a knife to stick in your back. Everything that I have is coming right here. I'll sit down in front of you, and there are questions you know I'm going to ask. There are questions you know I have to ask, and I will ask them. But there's nothing that's coming around with a knife in the back.
For the tease.
Yeah.
We were able to convey to them that we were going to go beyond the trash and the tabloid headlines that have characterized the coverage of these people for the last however many years.
It's been very hard to get their trust.
Yeah, I don't know that we have their trust completely, but I think we have it enough for them to sit down.
What's a producer's skill in this game? A producer's skill is getting on someone to go on the air. Sometimes it's not in their interest at all to go on the air. And we have to convince them that it is in their interest to go on the air. And the care and feeding of either reluctant or nervous witnesses, that's what you call being a producer in this business.
We have too many questions. We're going to be there all night, and by the time his interview's over, our evening will have been over, and we will have not interviewed the 7 Kennedys. So, how do we pare this down?
He looked yesterday at a CBS Reports program that I had produced in 1967. It was about Robert Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy. So when he came in to talk to me about it, it's really amazing. That's 30 years ago.
But just remembering all those names must be impossible. Not only the children's, Kathleen, Joe, Bobby, David, Courtney, Michael, Carrie, Christopher, Matthew, and Douglas and their cousins, but also the dogs and the horses and the iguanas.
So it's nice, you know, there is a continuity. In our business, it's kind of the shared history of us all that makes this kind of interesting.
Will you take camera 2, please, Roger?
50 years at CBS, and before that, the AP, and before that, United Press, Acme News Pictures, and before that, I was a war correspondent in Europe. I had the dubious distinction of being the youngest war correspondent accredited to the Eisenhower headquarters. I just happened to be there when I was young, and I happen to still be here when I'm old, and the years in between were very nice.
In the years in between, Don was the director of Edward R. Murrow's See It Now, the producer of Douglas Edwards With the News, producer and/or director of major live news events, including political conventions and the first presidential debate, and until 1964, the executive producer of the Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Don always has had almost a pogo stick reaction to the news. Whenever anything happens, he's almost physically hopping up and down with ideas and how to get at the story and what should be shot. Much of what we see today on the Evening News was pioneered by Don Hewitt.
Because it was only on October the 24th that our ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai Stevenson, was assaulted in Dallas, leaving a dinner meeting there. From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
I don't think anything affected me like that. Nothing. It was frightening. It was scary. You didn't know whether we were on the verge of a revolution. Nobody knew who had done it. We were lost. And television rose to the occasion. It transformed the television set. It became the chapel. And it was television that calmed them down and patted them on the head and said, "Take it easy, fellas. It's all going to be okay."
Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded.
We held the air for a couple of days.
I heard first a loud
loud report. It sounded to me like a giant firecracker.
One of the big catches journalistically would have been getting hold of the film that a Mr. Zapruder shot, home movies, that actually showed the moment of impact of the bullet on President Kennedy.
And everybody was bidding for it. So Dan Rather told me about it, and I said, Dan, listen, you've got to get that film. I said, when you get there, hit 'em. Grab the film, run back to CBS with it, put it on tape, then return the film and let the lawyers decide what they want to do about it. And all they can get you for is assault because you will have returned the thing. And he said, great idea, I'll do it. And I hung up and I said, oh my God, don't do that. And I called him back, thank God I got him before he left. I said, Dan, don't do that. That's the stupidest thing I ever said to anybody. And of course, we never did it.
The only problem I ever had with Don was that he was so aggressive in going after the story that I wasn't always sure what arrangements he'd made to get the story.
I remember the day I got canned off the show.
Don Hewitt's brash approach to broadcasting often clashed with the more conservative style of CBS News president Fred Friendly. In December of 1964, Don was removed from his position as executive producer of the Evening News and reassigned.
Fred Friendly was president of CBS News, and he called me in, and he said, Don, the Cronkite News is not big enough for you. I'm going to set up a special unit just for you, and I want you to be in charge of all breaking news coverage. I want you to go on every big story. I just don't think this show is big enough for you. And stupidly, I bought all this. And I went into Bill Leonard, who was then vice president of CBS News, and I said, Bill, guess what? Friendly is going to have this special unit just for me, and I'm going to be... And he said, Don, you just got fired. I said, no, you don't understand, Bill. I mean, there's going to be this special... And all of a sudden I said, oh, my God, he's right. I did. And in hindsight, it turned out to be a pretty good thing. But it was devastating at the time. You know, I had my legs cut off.
Don was really fighting for his professional existence at that moment. It's hard to believe this in retrospect, but he was in an office about the size of this one, by himself, one helper, and trying to come up with notions for shows.
Good evening. This is 60 Minutes. It's a kind of a magazine for television, which means it has the flexibility and diversity of a magazine adapted to broadcast journalism.
He took that hour program on Robert Kennedy, and he took a great 10 minutes out of it. And he did that with, I think, 2 other documentaries. And he put them together in a half-an-hour pilot. And he showed it to people, and he showed it to people, and he showed it to people. There was a sort of a joke, you know, that if you were walking down the corridor of the broadcast center and you saw Don way up at the other end, at, 100 yards away, and he had something under his arm, you knew it was the pilot, and you ducked into an office and closed the door because you didn't want to look at it again.
Don is a very persuasive fella. Don Hewitt in full cry is irresistible. And so I cast my lot with Don Hewitt. Can you imagine if I'd gone to Washington as the press secretary to Richard Nixon?
Chances are that you were watching television when they were balloting at the Republican convention. So was the man who won that nomination.
Documentaries were always the voice of the corporation. This was the voice of living, breathing people. It was my intention to sort of almost publish our notes.
That cover story is about police and the people.
Life magazine's format, I realized, was the perfect format for television. In television documentaries, there was always a commercial break, which broke your train of thought. I said, this is going to be the broadcast that'll never happen. You will finish the story on a birth of the baby, the way Life did, and you'll stop and you'll look at 3 pages of advertising, and then you'll go to Joan Crawford or Marilyn Monroe, and then you'll come back and do underwater exploration, and divided by the commercials. So it was the perfect television organism.
What do you think of Richard Nixon?
He's evidently a very sick man, and I regret that.
I don't think there is any better television than a talking head with something to say. Interviewing is the core, and let an interview develop the Q, the A. I found Mike Wallace's questions sometimes more fascinating than the other person's answers. And an interview with Mike Wallace was like watching a gun duel at the OK Corral.
Well, you knew that they had broken in?
No, well, I knew after the fact.
I know, but you knew by this time. That was back in 1971 that they broke in September.
I didn't...
To Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office.
That didn't seem to come home to me.
It was with the Watergate programs in 1973 that 60 Minutes found the style for which it became famous, the tough interview.
For some reason, nobody else was doing television interviews with some of the co-conspirators. Nightline was not on the air back then. The other magazine shows were not on the air back then. So we were the only broadcast with enough time to do some of this stuff back then.
Did you really threaten to kill Jeb Magruder?
I think that's one of the few truthful statements that Jeb Magruder has made.
We believe that there is almost nothing better in television than an interesting person saying something interesting. And if Bobby Kennedy's children, if a group interview or interviews with Bobby Kennedy's children can't produce something interesting, then we're in the wrong business.
Mike, you starting to edit?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
But,
Wait, you're looking at transcripts? Hey, it's going to be great.
Yeah. We're working on transcripts.
All right.
Through it, and it'll be good.
How competitive were the games?
Oh, never. Just sort of to play.
Was it important who won? I mean, and how you played?
It's more important who won.
We have 10 days to put this show on the air, and that entails screening all the material, editing the material down to...
You're talking about 25 hours of material?
Oh, we'll have probably at least 25 hours of material going into 13 minutes, ending with 13 minutes. If we're trying to make it a little longer, it's hard to do justice on this piece in 13 minutes.
Like every story, this one has to be screened for Don and must earn his approval before it goes on the air. Not an easy proposition. For the next week, the Kennedy team will be working day and night to compress those 25 hours of material into a well-told 13-minute story. Although Don has not yet seen it, he's been thinking about it.
I checked the promo with him. I told him I wrote the promo without ever seeing it. So far, the Kennedy kids have hardly done credit to the Kennedy name. Can they clean up their act? They say they can, and they say it to Ed Bradley Sunday on 60 Minutes.
You don't think that's a little strong?
A little strong? Yeah. So far, the Kennedy kids have hardly done credit to the Kennedy name. They haven't. My God, you got Steve Smith is on a rape trial. One guy's getting the Vatican to give him a divorce. John is pissing all over the rest of the family. Come on. You don't think that so far the Kennedy kids have hardly done credit to the Kennedy name?
Maybe you have a higher opinion of the Kennedy name.
Oh, well, listen, let's face it, to a lot of people in America, they were America's royal family. I mean...
What do you want to call this?
The Kennedys.
The Kennedys.
The Kennedys. How can you not call it just the Kennedys?
We've just come back from doing a piece about dirty justice in Ecuador, bribery and corruption, and American citizens in some very disgusting prisons down there. I think this week that Ecuador would be a good piece to put on. Oh, Ecuador.
Yeah.
The president is going to South America next week.
He's not going to Ecuador, though.
No.
No.
But what this does is...
Why don't we let him go? A presidential trip is a thin reed to hang a story that good on. You don't need a peg for that story. That story stands by itself. If you went and did it, nobody else has done it. That's what I always figured. I always think the best peg is that it's a damn good story, and Mike Wallace found it.
He knows that he has 2 or 3 other people who have stories for next week. So he's now finding reasons that maybe, it's a story that stands by itself. It doesn't so the president goes to South America. No big deal. Come on.
So if nothing else...
Every correspondent and every producer takes the same tack. They're trying to get their stories on the air by the urgency of them. If we don't get this story on the air, the guy's going to die. If we don't get this story on the air, the Supreme Court's going to come down with its decision and blow this right out of the water. And on and on and on like that. And we hear that every week about almost every story, and it's probably true of all of them.
Whose story is the Cruz story? Tony?
Yes. Tony Fuldo.
We want to take a look at it. You're in the middle of the Kennedy stuff, right?
The lineup for next Sunday is still undecided. Don wants to see the Rolando Cruz story, the work of the same producer and editor that have been on the Kennedy piece. The Cruz piece was completed a couple of weeks ago and has been filed in the 60 Minutes bank to be withdrawn when needed.
A trial that could shake the foundation of the criminal justice system in Illinois is set to begin next month in Chicago. 7 prosecutors and police officers are accused of fabricating the evidence that sent an innocent man to death row for the rape and murder of a 10-year-old girl. What is most disturbing about this story is that another man, the man who actually confessed to the murder, has not been prosecuted and may never be. Good story. Now enter a world-famous mystery writer who also happens to be a lawyer, Scott Turow, whose bestsellers include Presumed Innocent and Burden of Proof.
Can you imagine committing a murder of this nature and leaving behind no physical evidence of any kind? Not a fingerprint, not a hair, not a fiber, no DNA?
This way. Is it in?
Yeah, it's in.
Now that the Cruz story is a go, it has to be trimmed to fit into its time slot in Sunday's program.
We have a problem.
This is typical of what happens every time I see Michael. We have a problem.
We have to make cuts in this piece for Sunday. The Rolando Cruz piece.
I screened it for Don
Don just went through the whole thing.
Did he make the cuts?
He did.
The police and prosecutors sent innocent men to death row.
Out.
He wants that out?
Right.
Is that a good cut, you think?
No, it's not a good cut, especially since we're gonna have to start with these police cars. Where the hell does that come from, right? But let's just log it in there.
Well, that's
How long is the sentence?
6 seconds.
Sometimes you edit for accuracy. Sometimes you edit for impact. Sometimes you just edit for space. And you say, listen, I love your story. It doesn't fit. I always have, I tell these guys, if you want to finish your story sitting on touched by an angel's lap, be my guest. But at a certain time, they come on and we go off, and you'll have to finish your story over there because we don't have any more time.
Radutsky and associate producer Jonathan Wells have cut the Rolando Cruz piece down to time, but there is still a problem with the length of the tag. That moment when the correspondent comes back on camera and wraps up the piece.
41.
Horrific. And that includes the end?
The end
without the end.
That's without the end. The purpose of the tag, though, is to say...
Yeah, I know, but come on. You don't have the time to do it.
Minus the tag, right, we lose 41 seconds.
And we have the tag, we lose a minute. Let her decide. If she's in trouble, she may have to drop the tag.
Are you gonna lose the tag?
Well, now we'll lose the tag. But
What is it? Yeah, but the tag, don't you have to say that? I don't know what he's doing.
The tag, where's the tag? You have a copy of the tag?
I don't have the tag with me.
Yeah,
It says they deny
It
the
says they deny the
charges.
charges, and then they say that the people who have been indicted have moved on to become a judge and a federal
That's
prosecutor.
important to say. Don't drop that tag.
Right, that wasn't included in the original time.
That's never in the
Oh, okay.
time.
All right.
Tags and time
Right,
pieces
okay.
of time are
All right,
completely
Okay,
different.
1338 minus 41 is how much? Exactly.
1257.
No, 1238 and what?
It's 1338 minus 41.
It's 1257.
Do you want to make it at 20? The tag at 20, and we'll make it work at 20.
Yeah. Will you do that for me?
Yes.
Just calm down.
Since Rolando Cruz was first sent to death row, many of the people who put him there have moved up the law enforcement ladder, including the 2 top prosecutors in the case. Thomas Knight went on to become a federal prosecutor, and Robert Colander is now a judge. They, along with the other 5 officials now under indictment, deny the charges against them. I read that pretty slow, didn't I? What was it? 22. So just to be safe, should we get rid of including the top prosecutors in the case?
I'll change that.
They, along with the other 5 officials now under indictment, deny the charges against them. It's 18. You see, if you leave out the 2 top prosecutors, then it's not clear that he prosecuted the case. He could be anybody. So it's versus 18 seconds versus 22. 22.
Open the door.
I'm gonna be locked in here for a half hour, but I just have to get this done. I just have to get this out to somebody who's waiting for it.
You look very nice.
What is it you need?
This weekend, you going home?
Well, there's Yom Kippur, you know, and if I don't atone for the behavior of the previous year, I don't have a chance for next year. So there's one day off, Saturday, and then I'll be back here Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, Don's got to screen it Wednesday, changes got to be made Thursday and Friday, and that has to be locked up because it'll probably air next Sunday. So.
I was by the Kennedy show now.
Correct, yeah. Switching gears just a bit.
Where do you live?
I live about 35 miles away in New Jersey.
With how many kids?
3 children.
Where do you see them?
Sometimes not very often.
What's your
Trade-off.
What's your
Trade-offs.
Yes, what's the trade-off?
Trade-off.
Your average weekday?
Well, the average depends when I'm doing a story. It's 95% 60 minutes and 5% everything else. And when I'm not, it probably goes down to about 50-50. Hopeful.
It's tough.
Sure is.
Is it worth it?
Yeah, I guess. Sick thing to say, but yeah, it is worth it, I guess. I guess.
I know already it's too long.
Radutsky has to go back to work on the Kennedys, but Don is still finishing Cruise. For every program, promotional spots have to be written and teases have to be prepared. All the networks have large departments to do this. 60 Minutes has Don Hewitt.
Hey, Ed, promo. You mean they sent him to death row and they knew he didn't do it? That the cops and prosecutors that put him there may now find themselves behind bars? 60 Minutes, Sunday. Perfect. Mary! Nope. Can't follow her to the ladies' room. But I'll find her. You haven't seen Mary, have you? Hey, Mary! Here's the better promo. You mean they sent him to death row and they knew he didn't do it? And that the cops, the prosecutors who put him there may now find themselves behind bars? 60 Minutes.
You said the first sentence?
You mean they sent him to death row and they knew he didn't do it?
Well, at the time that they put him there, they claimed that they thought he did do it. And then a judge later and two trials later...
The guys who put him there. The guys
who
put
are now
him there
indicted.
Knew he didn't do it.
Well, they're indicted on that charge.
That's right. We're asking.
You're asking for as a question.
That
that's what the indictment says.
That the cops and prosecutors who put him there may now find themselves behind bars?
That's it.
60 Minutes.
That's what the indictment says.
Yeah, that's it.
You mean they sent him to death row and they knew he didn't do it? We're not saying he did. You mean they sent him to death row? That's what they're saying.
Right.
The indictment is saying that, right?
The only problem, potential problem there is they knew he didn't do it.
But that's what they're saying. You put this guy in death row.
They knew the evidence was false. The problem is that they sent them to death row. That's the prosecutors. And
No, it's
they
not the
knew-
prosecutors.
No one's charged in that indictment that they knew he was innocent. You see what I mean? They're charged with knowing that the evidence was false. They made up the evidence.
You mean he was on death row? See, that's what you. It's the only way people are going to be interested in this story. You mean he was on death row? Oh, listen, how about you mean he was on death row and he didn't do it, and that the cops and prosecutors that put him there may now find themselves behind bars?
That definitely works.
You mean he was on death row and he didn't do it? Okay, we will make it that way. Everybody who works for me is smarter than I am. They're better read. They're better educated. I think a lot about the fact that, I never graduated from college. I quit NYU. I wanted a track scholarship, and I quit after 1 year because I just wanted to be in the newspaper business. I really didn't want to waste any time in college. So I went to work for the old New York Herald Tribune, and it was nirvana. I really am in awe of all those kids. They don't pander either to the audience or to me. None of them are afraid to argue with me, which I love. I don't want anybody to work for me who wouldn't argue with me. And somehow, with their brains and my fingertips, it works. Stop. Let me hear this. Okay, go ahead. That community was up in arms.
I think one of the most distinctive things about the show is the tease for your story and for everyone's story, that block at the beginning of the program where you see 3 stories condensed into 14 or 15 seconds. And that is Don's domain.
Wait a minute, up in arms. Give me the line, they demanded justice.
There was
Keep
pressure
going,
on the
keep
police
going.
and prosecutors to bring someone. Absolutely.
No. Yeah, that's someone, his lawyers say.
That someone, his lawyers say.
Perfect. Couldn't be better.
If this man had nothing to do with the murder, what was he doing on death row?
That community was up in arms. They demanded justice.
There was pressure on the police and prosecutors to bring someone.
Absolutely.
That someone, his lawyers say, turned out to be anyone whose arrest would quiet the community. Now, the men who charged him with the murder may soon find themselves behind bars.
And that's how teasers are born. Da, 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 da.
I don't think I've ever worked for anybody who was able to create a job for himself in which he did only the things that he liked and wanted to do and totally divorced himself from all of the crap that he didn't.
Don's not a manager. Or maybe I should say Don's style of managing is, you take care of it. You guys work it out.
And he has allowed himself to be totally uninvolved in everything, really, except for what goes on the air.
Hey, I think we're ready to go.
Hey, that might be it. That might be it.
Let's
Tel
do
Aviv, TA. That's right.
We may be getting a piece.
There's nothing in the world people fear more than suicide bombers.
Suicide bomber. It's always better as a singular.
The distinctive thing about 60 Minutes is the way the stories are told, and the stories are told the way Don Hewitt tells them. He molds every piece.
When we bring a piece to Don, he's already seeing something wonderful, but he is seeing it fresh. He's seeing, we call it fresh eyes. He's bringing something open. No preconceived ideas. All he knows about this story are the two little paragraphs we fed him 6 months before or 3 months before.
Let's start again. There's nothing in the world people fear more than a suicide bomb.
Right.
No one understands why they do what they do. You can go to the day, it doesn't make any sense.
Okay, fine. He just went through work suggesting ideas, things that you hadn't thought of from a form point of view, way to set the story up, make it a little cuter, and he actually went back into the editing room with me. Now, that had never happened to me in the 6 years I was at ABC at the network. Usually they tell you, change this, do that, make it this way, you take notes, you go and do it. This guy actually came back in and said, here, we're going to do this, absolutely hands-on. So in that sense, it was great.
I will watch the show at home, and I'll say to Marilyn, wait, listen to what this guy says. This is terrific. Watch, listen to what he says next. And then all of a sudden it dawns on me, there's not a guy like me in every living room in America saying, you got to listen to this. So you've got to build it. And you can only be a television producer if you become a television viewer. You've got to sit in a screening room and say, if I were home tonight watching this, would I stay with this or would I? It's the Hey Mildred syndrome. It's the guy who says to wife, hey Mildred, do you know what these guys are talking about? No, let's go watch the basketball game.
I think that perhaps his attention span and his interest is very much what the people's interest is. And he may be guilty also for shortening America's attention span, I think, because he can fit everything into 15 minutes.
It kind of dawned on me once that I may be the only person I ever knew who has turned an attention deficit disorder into an asset. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. I'm going to do a radio thing. Mary,
A radio
30
thing?
seconds of radio. Hey, Bevy, National Benefit Life. This must be something to do with Frankie, right? I think I may have been hyperactive as a child. I think I've probably been hyperactive all my life. It's very annoying to people around you to be hyperactive. It may be an inspiration to people who work with you, but the people who live with you, you know, I don't think it's very easy to live with a hyperactive person.
Living with Don is exhausting.
Well, I'm telling you, Don's going to look at this in the midst of this second piece here. He's going to just sit there. He's going to just sit there and go, okay, I get it. I get it.
Can we at least go into a screening before you decide to make that decision for Don? Please. I'll be right back.
Are you totally exhausted? Oh, you know. They may think this is just the greatest thing they've ever seen, and they may think, who cares? Who cares?
starting to get tired of this. I mean, I'm just going on instinct now.
Are you going to go home tonight?
No, I can't go home tonight. We're screening at 8:30 in the morning.
And he said he didn't want to talk about it. Robert and Ethel Kennedy are still grappling with his death. Many people saw it as the moment when Joe Kennedy emerged as the next leader.
The countdown begins. In just 30 minutes, they will enter the screening room, the inner sanctum, where Don will see the piece for the first time.
The computer locked down. It just locked up at the moment we were going to print 10 copies. It's locking again.
It's locking.
Mother.
Okay. We got a little computer.
All right, we just got to redo the whole damn thing, okay?
Right.
Do the whole damn thing.
Can you put
10 minutes before the screening,
Can you-
right?
Right.
And
Can you put it on a desk?
Mother.
Do you want to put it in my...
No, just going to
in
do
my
it now.
computer?
10 minutes before the screening, and the computer's locking up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what the... Damn it.
Well, it's usually a rough room this early in the morning, so.
Is it frozen or is it okay?
It's okay for now, but, you know, it's...
All right, save it as you go.
For a time, the closest thing we had.
Michael, how long does this run?
15.
What?
15.
15. All right.
Soon you made it up without blowing up.
That's
all right.
And you? Okie dokie.
You're going to give it to me.
The last time many of us saw Robert and Ethel Kennedy's children, they were kids, horsing around at Hickory Hill.
The lights go down, the piece begins, there's no reaction in the room. Occasionally those lines go by that you think were hysterically funny in the edit room that get no reaction in the screening room. And at that point you're sort of dreading that moment when the lights come up and Don turns around and you get the verdict.
He turns to me and he says, "Do you want it sugar-coated or do you want the truth?" I said, "Well, let's start off with the truth." And the truth was pretty biting. And then I said, "Okay, now I'll take the sugar-coated version."
My first screening, this
If
was
it's not- if
Homeless
nothing
Women in
after,
Bel Air.
that's the
I
worst.
thought the piece was just brilliant. I thought it was the Emmy Award winning of all time. I thought it was a Peabody. I thought it was a DuPont. I thought it was going to be in the Johnny Carson show.
I would stand in the back of the room and that way be able to watch the body language.
And I never look at him. I just stare right at the screen.
When there's dead silence during the screening, you're just kind of waiting for a bomb to drop.
I turn around and he's on his feet. No one tells me that's the kiss of death either. No one says silence and on his feet. And he says, "Why would anybody care?" Oh!
The lights came up and Don said, "It's just a good thing that his career and your career and my career don't hinge on that cut or we'd all be out of work."
What's even worse than silence is if there's a silence and then 10 seconds later, then it goes,
Oh, the sigh.
the sigh.
Then when it's really, really, really bad, I've seen lots of stories
As I
around
used to
it.
say, there wasn't a story I've ever seen that I couldn't fix until now.
Burma never made air. When the lights went up, there was silence. And you say, "Oh my God, was it that bad?" And Don finally said, "You know, I've never seen a piece I didn't think I could make better." He said, "But I'm going to tell you, all you got here is, hey, here come some monks. Way, here come some more monks. Whoop, there go the monks." It was a disaster, boy. It was an absolute disaster.
As a family that lost a father, and left 11 kids, that were somehow devastated. And I think all of us work daily against those types of expectations.
Damn good.
Yeah, terrific.
We did it! Michael, where are you? You son of a bitch. Come here. You son of a bitch. You're the most nervous son of a bastard on earth.
It was great. It was great. They loved it. You know, it's a tough room. Very tough room. And you're dealing with people in that room, you know, who covered the Kennedys, who grew up with the Kennedys, who know the story inside and out. So you have to strike the right balance. And I had no idea whether we had. You know, you think it works, but you just don't know.
Screenings don't always go this well.
Here we go.
Some pieces are revised and screened 5, 10, 20 times before their fate is decided.
There are exercises in mano a mano, and the correspondent and the producer are really up against the board of directors. So what you've got to do is, if you really have a conviction, is to stand your ground. And that's when the blood hits the floor. Really does.
They're about to screen the story that Mike Wallace and Bob Anderson have been working on, about Americans imprisoned in Ecuador.
Here we go. We've found 3 Americans in prison in Ecuador who shouldn't be. Trouble is, unless you bribe a judge down there, you have to wait in prison, often for years, before you even get to trial. Take the case of Sandra Chase. She is a gullible 50-ish divorcee from Florida, where she met a wealthy Ecuadorian man who invited her to visit his country as his guest. Gullibly, she leapt at the chance. She didn't know that she was about to be duped into smuggling drugs back into the United States for him.
Fellas, look, you can't say what you say to me. You've got to say...
Wait a minute. We try, before you start the criticism, I think it's, frankly, I think that's damn.
You're the
good.
defense attorney. You're not a reporter.
What?
You're the defense attorney. You've got to say, last month we found 3 Americans in prison in Ecuador who, if you believe their story, shouldn't be.
What?
You can't say they shouldn't be.
What they shouldn't be?
You're saying flatly they shouldn't be in jail? That you found 3 Americans who shouldn't be in jail. Last month we found 3 Americans...
You're talking about the opening?
Yes, listen.
I'm talking about the piece.
I'm talking about all the way through. Just listen for a second. Last month, we found 3 Americans in prison in Ecuador who, if you believe their story, shouldn't be.
Fine.
Okay?
Fine.
There is absolutely no... Who says that you bribe a judge, you wait in prison for 4 years? I mean, you've got to pin that on somebody.
We pinned it on, we point that out with Verdugo.
Drop that for a second. Next line. Forget gullible. At 50...
No, not forget
We
gullible.
don't know.
Damn it.
When you listen,
She is.
Mike, listen, then you can talk afterwards. A 50-ish divorcee from Florida, what she says she didn't know about him was that she was being duped. She didn't know she was being duped. You can't say that.
All right, this is all about the opening.
But it's very important because the whole piece
I couldn't agree
wins
with
what,
you more, Don.
What
but
she... Mike, unless we do that, the whole piece...
We can do it, Don.
Just listen, but will you listen for a second? Because it sounds like you went down there, there are 3 defense attorneys arrested because she says, without her knowledge, her beneficent had slipped drugs in the lining of her suitcase. We don't know that he did or he didn't.
You made your point, Don. The
Mike,
point, we'll rewrite the opening. Now let's get to the film.
No.
Listen, if I may interject here, fellas. You guys live in New York. We went to Ecuador. We spent some time. Bob and Ty had been there for 10 days before I got there. I spent 3 or 4 days there. We talked to a variety of people. I mean, either you're a reporter or you're not a damn reporter. You people sit up here on the 9th floor on 57th Street, and you're telling me that you don't know that you don't believe what we learned down there.
It can be hard to believe.
Nobody can believe it.
Wait a second.
Oh, bullshit.
We believe what you've learned, but you can't
gotta
present
qualify
it as if you are there.
And we agree with that.
Advocate.
We agree with that.
Let me bring up 2...
Was I right about you agreeing about the beginning?
I agree.
She told us, if you believe what she says, she was duped.
We're
She
going
says
to
she
say
was
that,
On
Don.
page 3, Mike, I don't think we should say Sandra languished in custody for 10 full days.
Why?
Because those are words which are evocative of your support for her.
It's not a question of support. It's my disbelief that the U.S. Embassy would let an American citizen And they know.
And it's not enough
just,
to say she
just a
remained
moment.
in custody for 10 days.
No, she languished in custody. It's a word. It's a perfectly
No, but
legitimate
it's a
word.
word that means something. It means,
Well, actually, the truth of the matter is
that she was in a terrible situation.
she was in a terrible situation.
You don't know that either.
Forgive me. I know what she was in. She went first to a kind of holding pen where she was with 40 other people. She went from that to something called CDP, which was even worse.
Well, but
and
you
she-
should say that specifically. She was held for 10
You've given
days
us-
in a terrible place.
You've
or
given
a
us
place
12
something,
minutes, for
something.
Christ's
Well,
sake,
you've got
to do
more
this
than-
damn piece.
You got-
And then Mary over here complains that we're too long. So that's why we use the word language.
we don't complain we're too long.
This thing because you
Touched
think
by
we
an
have
Angel
something to
complains you're too
say?
long. They go on right after.
Or are we looking at this thing?
Right.
Or are we looking at this thing so we should say how wonderful it is?
She had been in custody. I mean, come on.
Okay, I got it. My principal thing was everything that was in the opening. I don't think you can start, we have found.
No,
All that puts a whole different cast on the whole story.
Yeah, all right.
And now,
Thank you.
Soft
Let's get out of
touch
here before
mine.
something further
Soft
happens.
touch mine.
If that's the best shot you got of the mountains in Quito, I wouldn't want to go there. It doesn't look like much to
No
me.
one's invited you, for Christ's sake.
Very pretty.
Can we leave? Thank you, Master.
This intense scrutiny of every frame, every phrase is standard operating procedure at 60 Minutes. On Sunday, 20 million critics will be watching.
It's the worst opening I've ever heard in my whole life. I couldn't believe it.
I got another question.
And then, and gullibly, she left at the chain.
I'm not convinced they're all that innocent.
And if they're not, does that make the piece unsympathetic? I mean, from your viewpoint?
Well, I'm not. That's not my job, whether it's sympathetic or unsympathetic. Is it a story that Ecuador is doing terrible things to American citizens? And I gotta be convinced that they are, or else there's no story. If some people went and put themselves in harm's way, it's an honest, dog bites man.
One of the things that I like about 60 Minutes is that everybody argues their points of view strongly from the heart without any kind of game playing, and it's sometimes initially very uncomfortable because passionately held views are exchanged and it gets very heated and very testy. But it's over.
I once said to CBS, in my next contract, I want a gun and a whip and a chair, because it's like being in a cage full of tigers. And there are temperaments, not the least of which is mine.
You want to please him. You want to do, you want to see his endeavor do well. At times you fight with him, certainly like I used to fight with my father about certain things that we happen to disagree on. And, a certain amount of that is tolerated, and then at a certain point it ends.
That's very different than other kinds of cultures that I've come from, be it ABC, be it the Wall Street Journal, where everybody, well, let's not show too much emotion here. Let's be politic about it. Let's carefully weigh all kinds of other factors before we say what we really believe. And maybe there's something to be said about that system too, and others thrive in it. I like this system.
What I'm is unknowingly.
yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things. You've got the fact that they're dupes.
Unknowingly. I mean, that's not the way to smuggle drugs. Another. If we're to believe two American women we found in prison in Ecuador, they are behind bars, they say, because they were victims of a scam by drug dealers.
Right.
A scam.
To trick them.
Here's the way it works. Find a woman who's only too happy to have you offer a free trip to Ecuador, then arrange to get a package of drugs into her suitcase on the way home. That's what Sandra Chase, a 50-ish and apparently gullible divorcee in Florida, says happened to her.
That's
That
excellent.
kind of gets us into it.
That is
Okay.
excellent. Have you given this to Anderson?
Yep.
You agree?
Absolutely.
I think it's right on the nose. He rewrote it. We will rewrite the rewrite. But he's right on the nose.
He wants you to tell the story. Just tell me the story.
I don't want history, I don't want background, I don't want parentheses, I don't want footnotes. Just tell me the story. And this is something I thought I knew how to do. And I was wrong, because he is teaching me how to do it better.
And that is true about 95% of the time. And I can give you lots of examples of how he has defied me.
The Bel Air homeless used to live in their own nice houses on some of the very streets where they now park their cars.
Don said to me, "Why would anybody care?" And I said, "You really don't like this?" And he said, "No, I really don't." And I begged him to let us fix it. And he said, "I don't think you can fix it." And we changed it a lot. And then we ended up with a piece that at least was going to get on the air. Then it went up on the blackboard. Now, have you seen our blackboard? It was September. And then it's December, it's still up on the board. Now it's March, it's still up on the board. And every now and then I go in and I say, you know, that piece, it's really good, we ought to run that. And say, well, you've got other better pieces. Finally, it's the end of the season. And there's only one stall piece up there. And he has to put it on. And he said, "I'm just trying to save you from embarrassment." And I said, "Embarrass me." And he said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm absolutely sure. Embarrass me." And it ran. And you know what he did? He called me on the phone and he said, "I was wrong." And he ran it a second time.
All Don is interested in is making the story as good as it can be. There's never anything personal in his criticism. And once you realize that, then you can take any criticism thrown at you.
I would like to believe, now I'm not sure I'm entitled to believe it, but I would like to believe that there's a little bit in me of what was in the Sam Goldwyns and the Skanks and the Louis B. Mayers, who came here as immigrants from, I didn't come as an immigrant, but came here, had trouble with the language, knew little or nothing, never went to school here, and knew how to make the Lindbergh story, the Lou Gehrig story, the Glenn Miller story, the Thomas Edison story. These guys sort of felt America in their fingertips. And I sometimes flatter myself that I can do the same thing. I'm not sure that I'm not over-flattering myself, but I would like to believe that.
That's what Sandra Chase, a 50-ish and apparently gullible divorcee from Florida, says happened to her.
Do you like that reading, Bob?
Wallace going in the movie?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, good.
Get it in there.
Have you finished?
Huh?
You finished?
Done there,
Yes, and I haven't smoked.
How many takes did it?
And I haven't
takes?
smoked a cigar in there either.
I don't smoke cigars in there. Garfinkel smokes cigars in there. I smoke cigars in my office and I close the door. Miss Stahl, thank you very much.
Oh, dear.
Usually takes him 10 takes.
Hewitt. Donald. He's on Avenue B.
On the east side.
Hewitt. Where are you? Where are you?
Yeah.
Here you go. All right. Here's what I have just done.
Right.
If we're to believe two American women we found in prison in Ecuador, they're behind bars, they say, because they were tricked into serving as unwitting drug mules, ferrying cocaine back into the United States for generous Ecuadorian gentlemen who offered these American women a free vacation tour down there. That's what Sandra Chase, a 50-ish and apparently gullible divorcee from Florida, says happened to her.
I'm in your tent. I'm in the tent. I was never in the tent before. Now I'm in the tent. Now I want to know about it. This show is about telling stories, and it's about words. Seldom if ever have I seen a story that I thought didn't work, that couldn't be fixed by the copy.
According to two American women we met in prison in Ecuador, they are behind bars because they were tricked into serving as unwitting drug mules. Tricked into ferrying cocaine back into the United States by generous Ecuadorian gentlemen who had offered each woman a free vacation down there.
Having just rewritten what we rewrote, I thought it only fair
if you hadn't seen what Molly Ivins sent me.
Strongest drive is neither love nor hate. It is one person's need to with another person's copy.
Is that right?
Yes. In 30 years, there have been all kinds of ups and downs and all kinds of relationships here in this shop. And the same is true with the Hewitt-Wallace relationship. Only one that we really had a falling apart on that lasted for some months was the tobacco story.
One of the most turbulent events in the history of 60 Minutes concerned the piece on tobacco insider and whistleblower Jeffrey Wigand. On November 17, 1995, this report appeared on CNN.
The state of Mississippi has subpoenaed Dr. Jeffrey Wigand, whose identity as a whistleblower has been confirmed by CNN. If Wigand, a former vice president of Brown & Williamson, testifies, he will spotlight the tobacco giant's manufacturing research and legal practices. Last Sunday, CBS News' flagship show, 60 Minutes, chose not to air an interview with Wigand, citing fear of legal action from Brown & Williamson.
Why? Because the insider had signed a confidentiality agreement, and because we knew about it. The cigarette company that he worked for could sue us for, they would claim, inducing him to break that agreement. And the potential liability to CBS as a result could reach into the billions of dollars.
The story was widely reported in the press, but no one talked about the effect it had on the people who worked at 60 Minutes.
It was awful. I came here in 51, worked from 51 to 55, came back in 1963 and have worked there since, and it was the only time when we were let down by BlackRock. But there was also not a hell of a lot of support in this shop.
Did Don screen this interview, get involved in this story?
Don and Mike saw it, thought it was great. I think Don was jumping around saying Pulitzer Prize or something, you know Don. But I knew it was pretty good because, as I said, you can have documents, you can have experts, but the insider is what makes television. The face, the person saying, this is what happened, and here's the guy.
Okay, so you screened it for the brass at 60 Minutes. When did the final judgment come in that Wigand's interview could not be aired?
Early September, right after Labor Day. And I was summoned to BlackRock for the first time in my 14 years at CBS. I went to the building. And it was at that meeting that I was told that there was some problem with this guy speaking at all. So then I said to myself, well, this is just coming from lawyers. What does the president of the news division have to say? And he said...
This is Eric Ober.
Yeah, Eric Ober. And he said, the corporation will not risk its assets on this story. End of story.
What does Don say?
Not much.
I hoped that we were going to be able to make law by putting this on the air. What does that mean? That means that put it on the air. Let them sue. Let them sue for breaking a confidentiality agreement. I cannot believe that any court would have come down against us on the business of breaking a confidentiality agreement.
Now, I'm sure that this was your argument to CBS, to Don.
They did not want to hear that argument.
Really?
The management didn't want to hear that argument. There was never any of this kind of candid discussion about all of that.
Never?
No.
Even between you and Don?
Don didn't want to hear it. We've got a gun pointed at our head, a $15 billion. So we have a story that we think is solid. We don't think anybody could ever sue us for libel. There are some twists and turns. And if you get in front of a jury in some state where all the people in that jury are related to people who work in tobacco companies, look out. That's a $15 billion gun pointed at your head. We may opt to get out of the line of fire.
He was on the company side, and Lowell Bergman and I and a couple of others here were not.
He wasn't about to step forward and say, hey, we're going to go forward on this, and you guys, nobody said that. Then you guys try and stop us.
They said that if you get sued in Carolina for $15 billion and you want to appeal it, you got to put up a 10% bond. That's $1,500,000,000 before you can even go to court and fight it.
At that time, Westinghouse was in the process of acquiring CBS. Although no lawsuit was threatened by Brown and Williamson, just the possibility of a multi-billion-dollar suit could kill the deal.
60 Minutes represents to people, at least from my point of view, is that we're the people that are supposed to stand up and do those things and challenge those things. And when we cave in to corporate lawyers who are saying, no, it's just too dicey, we could lose billions of dollars here. You know, Edward R. Murrow would have never done it. People forget what Collingwood and Murrow and Cronkite and all those people stood for. And Don Hewitt is the guy that sort of bridges all of that to us, because he was of that generation.
It was very touchy around here. A lot of folks didn't talk to each other for a long time during this whole episode.
I thought everybody had lost their minds.
Why?
You know, I think that whole episode almost destroyed the show.
People were accusing each other of things. I got swept up in it because I wanted Mike to stop talking about it. I thought if we all just stopped talking about it, it would go away. I wanted us to get quickly back to the rhythm that we had established. And because I don't like to work in an environment where people are shooting at each other all the time. And Mike got angry at me because he said, this is not a time to be quiet. And I think he's still a little annoyed at me. He still gives me little digs about me trying to stifle him.
So I remember telling Mike, this is not just killing a story, Mike, and it isn't going to just end here.
And it didn't. On October 18th, 60 Minutes was scooped. The Wall Street Journal published a story that contained virtually the same information that 60 Minutes had gotten from Jeffrey Wigand. It revealed neither Wigand's name nor the source of its information. Bergman told us that this stirred up Don and Mike, and Don came up with the idea to do a story about why they couldn't do the story. The following night, Mike and Morley appeared on The Charlie Rose Show, and tensions at 60 Minutes mounted.
And the question of whether Mike and the producer induced this guy, I think, is out of the question. This was, he wasn't paid, he wasn't threatened, he wasn't promised anything.
Mike asked me to come, and I obviously didn't know much. I didn't know that Wigand had been a paid consultant. And I felt that, I mean, that was something really important for me to know, because it left me out, I felt, left me hanging out there when it turned out that he was a paid consultant.
Morley Safer didn't know that Jeffrey Wigand had been paid a $12,000 consulting fee a year and a half earlier in connection with a different story on fire-safe cigarettes. Embarrassed at being put in the position of defending the Wigand piece without having all the facts, Safer fired off an angry fax to the entire staff, expressing his disapproval of the way the Bergman-Wallace team had handled the situation.
Morley begins attacking Mike and writes letters, and everybody was writing nasty memos and running around here slamming doors. And it was, I thought at the time that there were too many egos involved. I mean, everybody cared too much about their own position in it and who was right and who was wrong, and not enough about the effect that it could have on the show.
Was I happy about the decision? No, I was very unhappy about the decision. Did I have the power to change it? No, I did not have the power to change it. I was forbidden to do the story. Should Mike and I have walked out of here and said, so long, fellas, we're not working here anymore? Maybe.
Look, this is your reputation at stake.
He did.
Why don't you stand up and say, I'm Mike Wallace. I've got a reputation. Didn't you have the power to resign and think that it would make a difference?
I thought very seriously of quitting at that time. And for some reason, I believed, and I used to say it around here, we're gonna get that piece on the air. If I'm outside, that piece would never have gotten on the air, period. But now things have changed. Last week, the Wall Street Journal got hold of and published a confidential deposition Wigand gave in a Mississippi case, a November deposition that repeated many of the charges he made to us last August. And while a lawsuit is still a possibility, not putting Jeffrey Wigand's story on 60 Minutes no longer is.
Mike Wallace didn't mention that CBS and Westinghouse had by now finalized their deal. Jeffrey Wigand told Frontline that 60 Minutes had taken the course of least resistance. And if it hadn't been for the Wall Street Journal article, he didn't think that CBS would have broadcast the story.
It seems to me, as the executive producer, having been at CBS News for 50 years, having for 30 years had one of the most successful programs on television, I can't believe that there wasn't something else that you could have done. Is there not?
No, no. Mike went as far as Mike went further than I did. Mike went on Charlie Rose and raised hell about it. I didn't. It was not my proudest moment. I was sometimes a bowl of Jell-O. Wish it never happened. I'm very proud of the fact that we climbed out of it. I wish I'd conducted myself as well as Mike had during that time. And Lowell Bergman, who was wonderful on this subject. I was more prone to give in than they were. But it was not my decision whether to give in or not.
The question is, what's the next industry or the next powerful institution that requires some scrutiny? And what happens then?
Absolutely, but this has laid a groundwork that might make the next story a little bit easier.
Maybe, or it may be harder. If you were a producer and you went through what I went through, would you do it?
Would you?
Oh, I'm crazy. I'd do it in a minute, but you know, it's not a good example, I don't think.
Come on in. Why don't we do this?
Okay. Two stories. You know about the one that we're working on about Las Vegas, the doctor. The other one has to do with counterfeiting drugs around the world. For instance, phony Zantac, the most popular drug in Europe and in other places around the country. If they were to publicize this, that there's this
That'd be a
massive
panic.
problem, right, and that's the argument that everyone uses whenever you do an investigative piece. If you do a story on a bad doctor, oh, people aren't going to trust doctors anymore. You do a story on a bad drug, oh, people aren't going to trust drugs anymore. The point is, the public deserves to know. This is a story that no one knows about, and I think it would be a huge public service in getting nations that are part of WHO and whatnot to try and do their jobs and to snuffing out this problem, which is killing, by best estimates, thousands of people around the world. I mean, 3,000 supposedly just in Niger, for instance.
Yeah.
Which I know is a
Where?
place you love to go to. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, you know, it's a vacation spot. Maybe we could pay for them to fly to New York for the interviews.
Unless we're belt tightening, and then we'll have to go there. I've got to listen to your rabbinical speeches and then also have to... Sarcasm. Yes, your miserable sarcasm. Well, between the two,
yeah,
I think the second one...
Well, I agree.
The world knows how to do retirement better than anyone I've ever. Lenny, we need you to readjust the lights. It was just kicked.
Turn to your right just a little, Ed.
Love 'em or hate 'em, they were for a time the closest thing we had to a royal family. Remember Camelot? Today, the Kennedys are still active in the family business. 3 are in Congress, 1 is a lieutenant governor. All of them have achieved something worthwhile.
Good. This is much
But starting with Chappaquiddick, brushes with the law, unsavory behavior, alcoholism, and drug abuse, all of that hasn't done much good for the family name.
Perfect.
Now, they are determined to do something about it.
Perfect.
Tonight, an updated look at the happy-go-lucky Kennedy kids, some of whom turned out to be not as happy or lucky as we all thought they would.
A lot of us have made mistakes, and they've been, some of which have been very serious. It has been, you know, not so good times, you know, in recent years.
Good morning, Phil.
Good morning.
Good morning,
How did we
honey.
do?
We were eighth. Eighth? Yeah. The most watched program on the CBS television network last week.
All right.
We're 30 years old. We're number 8 in television, never even giving a nod to ratings, sweeps weeks, what you got to do, what you don't have to do. You put on what you got. Now, how did Disney do?
16 share. And what did the Dateline do? An 8. All right, sounds like we're all right. It looks like we'll have another good season.
Don's title really should be editor-in-chief. Walter Cronkite told us he's a tough newsman. Producers and correspondents feel his strong lash on their backs. For 30 years and 2,800 stories, Don Hewitt set a breakneck pace for his staff and kept the show in the top 10 for 2 decades. But what is it about 60 Minutes that makes it special? And why, despite numerous efforts, has no one been able to equal it?
The imitators don't have that muscle that Don exercises. There isn't the steadfastness to their drive for that kind of perfection of investigative journalism and explanatory journalism. The others, well, they're softer, quite a lot softer than the Don Hewitt ethic.
We got a piece to look at.
60 Minutes holds its audience because it is a superior news program. It's never lost its focus in that regard. Never been tempted to say, well, I wouldn't say never been tempted. It's been tempted, and it's slipped a few times. But generally, it never has sunk to not being news-oriented.
60 Minutes is not without its critics. Some argue that by packaging the news in 12-minute segments, they're forced to oversimplify or even avoid complex issues.
I have never had the slightest interest in an issue. I only want to get stories of people dealing with issues whose lives were affected by issues. And we narrowed them down to bite size, where you could understand it and digest it. You see, even the people who wrote the Bible were smart enough to know, tell them a story. The issue was evil in the world. The story was Noah. Now, the Bible knew that. And for some reason or other, I latched onto it.
60 Minutes executive producer Don Hewitt.
It's exactly the same. He's a man who has not changed essentially in personality in the 46 years that I've known him. He says what he thinks. He does not censor himself, and he never has.
He doesn't pause to reflect ever about anything. It is, thank God Don wasn't president during the Bay of Pigs, because we would have launched.
He's not a confrontationalist, though. I've gotten some letters from him when he's been really angry at me, and he has.
I confess I try to bait him a little bit. It's a joy to bait him and to see how far you can push him.
Tell me something. When I came, no, I am not.
Don.
I am not put
You
on
can
weight.
barely, you would have.
No, shut up.
You wore.
No.
He
Listen,
wore the
listen.
jackets
Listen.
in high school.
Son of a bitch.
Because I love him, and because sometimes he's wrong. And when he gets in his genius mode, and it's absolutely certain that he's right, it's part of the 30 years together.
Mike and I were on an airplane once. It's many years ago, and it was an MGM Grand flight. We hadn't taken off from Los Angeles yet, and Mike got up to get something out of the upper compartment, and he didn't crumble. He went down like a tree in a forest, and he went bang, and he landed on his face. And I looked over, and I had this one reaction. My reaction was, oh, he's dead, and now we're never going to catch Cheers. Well, you know, it turned out Mike was fine. Paramedics came aboard, and I hope that when I die, somebody's going to say, oh, Don Hewitt is dead, and now we can't have anything to lead into Touched by an Angel Sunday night.
I think the Don's legacy is the legacy of 60 Minutes. It's an extraordinary body of work that now covers 3 decades. And that's pretty good going, I think. Particularly in an age when everything is kind of shoddy and cheap, and we still try to be a class act.
The forms of television that Don Hewitt has created are part of the collective unconscious of the United States. People, I'm sure, dream in this form, they think in this form, and they understand things in that form. And for that, he should be remembered.
I don't think everybody around CBS knows how good he is, or that he is principally responsible for the success of 60 Minutes. I don't think, and they don't like to hear me say this, I do not think that 60 Minutes would survive Don's departure?
When I'm watching this show from some old man's home somewhere with Mike in the next rocking chair, it will open. I'm Ed Bradley. I'm Steve Croft. I'm Leslie Stahl. I'm Christiane Amanpour. I'm Bob Simon. Those stories and Andy Rooney's grandson tonight on 60 Minutes.
I mean, most people think his career started when he invented television magazine journalism. But there are so many other things that he has done. He has been around for so long. This is one amazing man. Now, I've done some research. For instance, did you know that Don Hewitt taught the Egyptians how to mummify? Do you remember the guy who built those wax wings so that his son could fly? Don's idea. And Hewitt was the one who built the scaffolding for Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. Don Hewitt invented fishing and came up with the concept of zero and the side saddle. Don Hewitt gave the world the Dow Jones Industrial Average and, more recently, the Frisbee. And Don Hewitt was the only...
American Masters. Brought to you by Conseco. How do you plan on paying unexpected medical bills? Conseco can help. Conseco. Step up.
Major funding for this program was provided by the National Endowment for the Arts, Rosalind P. Walter, viewers like you, and by the following.
This is PBS.
A longtime friend of the presidential hopeful, and then another TV news insider is blowing the whistle on media bias. John Stossel, he'll join us. We'll talk about how some liberals have attacked him straight ahead.
Toyota is the best-selling car brand in America.
Get out.
Camry, Corolla.
Sports cars, sedans.
Don't forget the Matrix.
Hybrids. I want a Camry.
And Toyota makes 9 different cars.
Choice is good.
And 6 of them start at under $20,000.
Nice.
What's another one? Solara.
Oh, yeah.
Toyota has a great car at a great price, just for you.
Your cat has an inner beast. Feed it. Whiskers, made to satisfy a cat's natural instincts.
You're wrong.
You're wrong.
You're wrong.
You know you're wrong, right?
Yeah. Hearts or puppies?
Hearts and puppies.
She replied to my email yet?
Oh.
How about now?
Oh.
How about these?
How about these?
Ballet?
Works every time. That's good, right? Ballet?
Life's better with the Butterfly. Come see all the ways you can get more done at MSN.com.
Even as a kid, I believed in giving people more for their money. I'm Roger Riney. I started Scottrade to take care of online investors like nobody else. With $7 trades, no transaction fees on thousands of mutual funds, and offices nationwide. Click, call, or stop by Scottrade today.
Americans are in great danger, great danger.
Undetected, under the radar, terrorists placing our borders under siege.
These borders are not safe. People are entering this country illegally every night.
They're smuggled in to destroy our way of life, and we can't stop them.
So what do we do? I mean, it's a vast border.
A shocking expose. Sunday, Linda Vester hosts Breaking Point, the terrorists next door.